By the power vested in me by the trustees of Pomona College, it is my honor to present Sherrilyn Ifill and to confer upon her the degree of Doctor of Humane Laws, honoris causa.
Good morning, everyone. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. First things first, congratulations to the class of 2023. This is a wonderful day, and amidst all the other stuff, we can't forget this is your day. And I know that you're anxious to celebrate with your family and friends and to begin your journey. I do first, however, have to thank President Starr and the Board of Trustees, not only for inviting me to speak before you today, but for this wonderful honorary doctorate. It means a great deal to me. Obviously, there's something special at Pomona, and there has been for a long time. This is my first visit to your campus, but I've known your school through 6 degrees of separation with some of your most prestigious alumni. One is a personal hero for me, Dr. Merle Evers Williams, who recently donated her archival papers to your school. Meeting her was one of the thrills of my life. Her late husband, Medgar Evers, had been represented by an LDF attorney, my hero and mentor, Constance Baker Motley, who later became the first Black federal judge. Judge Motley revered the Evers and spoke to me of them often. I had the opportunity to visit the archives yesterday, and the experience was moving and overwhelming. This is a sacred trust that I am so happy you all have stepped up and are willing to manage. We need now, more than ever, to preserve and to document this history in order to protect our democracy. Authoritarianism doesn't just challenge our rights, they don't just demonize difference, but authoritarianism always seeks to control history and seeks to attack our memory. And so now more than ever, we must be affirmative in protecting the memories and the history of some of our greatest workers for democracy. So I'm very gratified that those materials are here. Of course, the Pomona alum with whom I'm most connected is the late John Payton, who passed away suddenly after a brief illness in 2012. He graduated from Pomona in 1977, and when he was a student here, he helped create the Black Students Union. He worked to recruit then record numbers of Black students and engaged in civil rights and anti-war activities on campus. He later became one of the most brilliant and trusted lawyers in Washington, D.C., and for the last 4 years of his life served as the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He was my immediate predecessor in leading that venerable civil rights organization. He represented the University of Michigan in the affirmative action challenge before the United States Supreme Court, and so I am ever conscious of John's brilliant and successful advocacy as we face in the coming weeks the possible and maybe even likely dismantling of affirmative action by this Supreme Court. But John loved this school. I heard that comment about loving and challenging. He loved and he challenged in equal measure. He served on the board and always spoke movingly about his experiences here. And I just recently learned that your first Black graduate, attorney Winston Dixon, who graduated from Pomona in 1904, played a powerful role among lawyers in the state where I litigated my first voting rights case, Texas. In fact, my first client, when I was a young litigator at LDF, was the organization founded by Mr. Dixon, the Houston Lawyers Association. I represented them in 1989, and in 1991, in a decision written by Justice John Paul Stevens, the Supreme Court decided in Houston Lawyers Association versus Texas that elections for trial court judges are in fact covered by the provisions of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So I feel a special kinship with Pomona. I'm so glad that those of you who are graduating today had the opportunity and the precious time to live and study here. And in my remarks, I was going to say, I hope that you have savored the privilege of having your undergraduate years on this campus, but I can hear from your applause and from the remarks and from the way you support each other and your faculty that you are aware that you have been someplace special and that it has been a privilege. I also know that the last 4 years, as has already been described, has been difficult in a variety of ways. This has been a time of tremendous turbulence in our country, but you persevered. And I know you want to get to your celebration, but it would be remiss of me, given what I do and who I am, not to take this moment to speak to you about the moment we are in this country and the role we must all play at this very perilous moment. And so I hope you'll entertain me for a moment. I wish I could tell you that the next 4 years, as you find your way in this coming new era of your life, will be easy in our land. But you wouldn't believe me even if I lied to you. You know, as I do, that this remains a period of tremendous challenge for our democracy. You may have even heard older people around you say, well, the young people will have to save us now. To my mind, that's a terrible thing to say. Basically, we've screwed the world up, now let's have the kids clean up our mess. But that's not how it works. Our country, our environment, our economy, our democracy will be saved, as always, by the ecosystem of people in this country, young and old, rich and poor, East Coast and West, South and North, Black, white, Asian, Latin American, Native American, of all faiths, queer, straight, who understand and take seriously our obligation to devote some measure of our time and lives to doing the work of citizenship. And by citizenship here, I don't mean formally being a citizen. I mean citizens being those people who have chosen to be part of this community. I wanted to be, as you heard, a civil rights lawyer from the time I was a girl. In my high school yearbook, however, it says that I want to be a Supreme Court justice. But I did want to be a civil rights lawyer. I had never met a lawyer. In fact, the first lawyer I met was my first professor in law school. There's nothing wrong with, as Nasira said, not knowing what's on the other side, but continuing to press forward and work anyway. I was raised in a large family. I'm the youngest of 10, a black girl bused to school in the intense period of integration in northern schools, with exposure early on to the concepts of inequality and injustice. But my attraction to civil rights work was as much a consequence of my observations of the world as my exposure to books that I took out at the public library every Saturday, and films and documentaries that aroused my sense that injustice was not something to just observe, but something to confront and defeat. It's infuriating to me that some students in Florida and Texas and many other states will be denied the opportunity to learn about injustice, about racism, homophobia, inequality, because as the language of the statutes banning this instruction says, it may cause feelings of, quote, discomfort, guilt, or shame. I can recall reading the diary of Anne Frank in the 6th grade and feeling all of those emotions: discomfort, guilt, shame. Those emotions were critical to developing a sense of empathy, a sense of responsibility, and a commitment to fight against injustice and suffering. For citizens in a democracy, these emotions are critical to developing our ability to humanely exercise the responsibilities of citizenship as voters, as jurors, as neighbors, as teachers, as leaders. A developed sense of empathy is necessary for you to make good decisions at the ballot box and in your community and in your workplace and even in a subway car. My exposure to these texts and films made me want to become a civil rights lawyer, seeing those pioneers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and Pauli Murray and Jack Greenberg. They seemed like superheroes, and while to you, when you read about them now, they must seem like they are from an older generation, they were in their 20s when they started the work that ended up changing America. Believe me when I tell you that it remains unbelievable and thrilling that my dream to be part of this community came true. I thought I had missed the civil rights movement because I thought there was only one civil rights movement and that it was over by the time I became an adult. But what I have learned is that in a democracy, there must be, and fortunately are, successive civil rights movements. Civil rights movements grow and develop in the times when democracy is under threat, when forces that stand against equality and justice feel emboldened. So if you want to be part of a civil rights movement, you are inviting tough times. But civil rights movements also happen when those who have lived their lives at the margins of our society demand their rightful place as first-class citizens, when queer people demand the right to love and marry who they wish, when mothers demand justice for the killing of their unarmed sons at the hands of police, when voters determined to overcome voter suppression stand in line waiting to vote for 9 hours, when students who have enjoyed active shooter training for their entire lives, as you have, walk out of their classrooms to the State House in Tennessee and demand common sense gun safety laws, when the families of massacred victims in Buffalo decide to sue online sites that radicalize the shooter who massacred their relative. You know you are in a civil rights movement when legislators expelled from state legislatures for standing up for gun safety and for protections for trans people garner support from millions of people across the country. When women create and fund networks across the country to try and ensure that women and girls maintain the right to control their bodies and decide whether and when they will bear children. When librarians defy banning books. We are in a civil rights movement when oppression is met with resistance and defiance. I say all of this because I know we are living in a time that feels overwhelming. Our democracy is being pressed and challenged on every side. All of us are tired, many of us are angry. You young people I know, many of you are angry or at least disappointed. Angry and disappointed about the prohibitive costs of renting apartments in our nation's largest cities. You wonder whether you will be able to live financially independent of your parents. We also wonder, by the way. You are angry about the shameful and unconscionable refusal of our country and countries around the world to take meaningful and aggressive steps to stem the inevitable devastation of climate change. You are rightfully frustrated by the lock on political power held by those who are 40, 50, 60 years older than you. Angry and frustrated that our politics appears broken and that our country seems incapable of marshaling its power to solve the most urgent problems. I get it. I'm angry too. But I'm also keenly aware that this moment presents us with powerful opportunities. It is only as the old order unravels that we have the opportunity to build something new in its place. That's what happened during the Civil Rights Movement. A new America was created, one that made my life possible, and perhaps many of the people assembled today. One that opened the door to the women's rights movement, one that resulted in a constitutional amendment that gave 18-year-olds the right to vote, one that resulted in changes to our immigration laws that finally allowed people from non-European countries to come to this country in larger numbers, one that made possible the ability of many people here to be married to the people they're married to live in the neighborhoods they live in, to have access to the jobs they currently hold, to be educated at the schools they've been able to attend. It is possible to make this country over, to make it better, stronger, fairer. And the opportunities to make those changes present themselves precisely at the moments of our greatest challenge. But we can only take advantage of that opportunity if we do not give up on the values that make democracy worth having: equality, justice, dignity, citizenship, opportunity, the rule of law. We must first and foremost hold on to the values that make democracies stronger, despite the seductive attraction of cynicism, nihilism, and even cruelty. We must also hold on to that very anger and frustration, but we must transform it into action. That's what happened during the Civil Rights Movement. There was tremendous suffering among those who fought to make this country better, and that suffering made them angry. They were angry and frustrated, but also determined in a new way. Out of that frustration came ideas and strategy and a willingness to sacrifice. Out of that frustration came the impetus to challenge their parents and professors, to speak truth to power, and to demand change. What they were able to accomplish in the 12 years that make up the formal civil rights movement, 1956 to 1968, was as transformative to our democracy as the Civil War. What those people did was not some heroic fantasy. It is what we are being called to do, each in our own way. Believe that we have the power to make change and use our history to reinforce our confidence that we can do it. Finally, I also want to make the case for joy, because you must also pursue joy. It is not that we must work just in this moment for justice and democracy. We must hold on to those things that make life worth living: family, friends, good food and wine, dancing, music. I, for example, am going to see Beyonce later this year. Don't hate, don't hate, don't hate. And joy. I've learned this from your generation, from my children. You are, even as we speak, changing the workplace. I don't know about the crop tops yet, but demanding time for your lives, humane work hours, and mental health supports. Your insistence on self-care as a critical part of any conception of resistance is brilliant. It is not something my generation was taught, and as a result, many of us and those who came before us behaved as though surviving in this work was a kind of hazing ritual and that burnout was inevitable. But you have taught us that hard work and self-care should go hand in hand, and I thank you for it. We must remember that joy is part of resistance as well. Joy is a defiant act that shouts our refusal to succumb to the dehumanizing forces that are all around us. So in closing, we need you in this fight. Whatever you decide to do next, grad school, law school, business, finance, if you pursue a career in the arts or in philanthropy or as an athlete, if you decide to teach or enter politics or a trade, you have to find time to do your part. What is your dream for the country we could have? This is the time to lean in, to insist, to demand, to believe that you can make a difference. You don't have to be a full-time civil rights activist or lawyer to find your role to play. Your citizenship is a contract that requires you to engage in contributing and fighting for our democracy. And while you do this work, hold your joy, which begins today with your family and friends as you celebrate the wonderful accomplishment of having completed your degree. Today is a good day. Grab it and embrace it. Congratulations, class of 2023.